Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for another episode in our Criminals, Cutthroats and Convicts series. In this episode, we take a look at the prince of the Punters, Perce Galea. Perce was born Percival John Galea, not in Australia, but in Malta, in a town called Mosta, situated in the centre to the north of Malta. He was born in October of 1910 to Catholic parents John Galea and Mary Saliba, Mary being John's second wife. By 2 years old, the family migrated to Australia, so you could say that Perce really grew up in Australia. The family settled in Woolloomooloo. Perce was one of 10 children to John Galea. He fathered 6 to his first wife and 4 to Mary. John Galea worked as a railway fettler, laying rail tracks, which would have provided somewhat for the large family, although I couldn't find how many of Galea's children migrated here. Most likely the 4 between John and Mary had come over together, which was enough mouths to feed. Perce became a newsboy at age 14, selling outside Central Station, which was a very busy spot. He most likely had gone to a Catholic school in the area, but he was already betting from that young age, most likely hanging around other children from the Woolloomooloo area and probably picking up on some bad habits, but none that had got him into trouble, luckily enough. Perce was very mild-mannered and had quite a lucky streak. Very polite, and people liked him. By 16, Perce had become a milkman for the Fresh Food and Ice Company Limited, and then a driver for them. One of his customers advised him to back a horse. The customer was Rodney Dangar, and the horse was Peter Pan at the 1934 Melbourne Cup, and he won £150. In 1933, Perce married an Australian girl, Beryl Kathleen Jones, a 20-year-old, while Perce was 22. They wed at St Mary's Cathedral on the 18th of February of 1933, having a son named Bruce in 1938. After being married, Perce worked as a wharf labourer for some time, but as he was very interested in the track, having won the money at the Melbourne Cup, this would have been thrilling for them. Perce eventually gets into legal bookmaking at the Wentworth Park Greyhound races, building his wealth and reputation during World War II. He just had a knack for backing the winner, much like George Freeman did. Getting into gaming, Perce was involved in Sammy Lee's baccarat schools, eventually investing £2,500 in Lee Enterprises Proprietary Limited, becoming a director of the baccarat schools in 1949. Sammy Lee around this time was the king of the cross, just before Abe took the crown. But Perce wasn't interested in the things that Abe Saffron enjoyed. Perce, like Freeman, was a punter and would not be a king. He was happy being the prince. It was around this time in the 1940s that Chow Hayes, our original gangster, met Perce Galea, whom he would have a lifelong friendship with. At first, Chow conned Perce with the cabbage leaf rort that he had going at the time, selling empty boxes of cigarettes with cabbage leaves inside. But it was only after they'd paid they realised that they'd been conned, and no one went to the police because they too would be fined for the purchase of illegal cigarettes. So it was eventually known around town the rort was over when they couldn't con anymore. But Perce wasn't upset or angered by Chow's antics, and later hired him to collect on his behalf, as well as a bouncer at his clubs. Perce also worked at Sammy Lee's theatre restaurant as host and supervisor of the staff. This was after Sammy Lee sold the Roosevelt to Abe Saffron. Perce also had connections to Sid Kelly, who was close to Phil the Jew Jeffs. But Perce didn't seem to attract violence like the other greats of organised crime. Sammy Lee valued customers, and it is likely that Perce picked up a lot from Sammy rather than the violence that surrounded Sid Kelly. Perce made money with his head, not his fists, or not having too many hired goons, although he did have Chow, and no one messed with Chow. Perce looked after people. He saw the value in having good solid connections rather than a lot of loose ones. When Chow was put in jail, Perce looked after Chow's family, as did Joe Taylor, another of Chow's employers from Tomo's two-up schools. Chow definitely earned his money. Perce became co-proprietor and manager of Elizabeth Bay Club, the Roslyn Social Club. Although they were meant to hold legal card games, they were raided in 1953 and Perce was fined £75. 46 members were arrested for gambling. Now in 1950, Perce, his wife Beryl, and two sons, Bruce and Clive, lived in Coogee. Perce had money now and was able to move them to a nice area. Baccarat was introduced to Sydney from Europeans. By the 1950s, Sydney was in a frenzy. Some clubs running games from 7 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next morning, serving people coffee and food to keep them awake. Women outnumbered the men in most of the clubs. Perce made a killing. It was illegal to gamble, but eventually he was hooked up paying the right corrupt people to keep away from his club, or at least giving a heads up when they were coming to raid. Perce expanded to the Victoria Club, which was an illegal casino. The who of who were there. Many celebrities came, and of course those most corrupt. Perce the Prince was friends to all, including Prime Minister, the Premier, and the head of the Catholic Church, where Perce donated money regularly from his earliest days until his last. He was rated quite highly in the Catholic community. Perce also acquired the Fountain Club. He had female hostesses who also worked as escorts for the rich bachelors. It seemed everyone was happy in the company of Perce Galea. If you wanted more of an upmarket night, you went to Perce's joints. If you wanted filth, you visited Abe's establishments. Although Perce seemed a lovely man, you wouldn't screw with him. Chow worked for him until he was jailed for the death of Bobby Lee, who he shot in the Ziegfeld Club after Bobby mistakenly killed Chow's nephew, Danny Simmons, in his home. If you haven't seen our episodes on Chow, definitely go and have a look at them. Chow was a real character. Chow served many years in jail, and Perce looked after him. Chow once stated that he could hit Perce up for money any time, except at the track. It was the only time you didn't approach him, but later on, Perce would give you anything. The Prince was a serious punter, but there was a time when things slumped for Perce. In 1957, he found himself overcommitted, possibly paying out a lot of money to the police and politicians, as so many of them did, giving to charities, as well as his own lavish, flamboyant lifestyle. He luckily won the lottery of £12,000, which gave him the financial injection he needed to keep going and expand. He had a close team which included Eric O'Farrell, Ronald Lee and Reginald Andrews. They all ran luxurious gambling houses during the Vietnam War, much like Abe catering to the Americans on R&R at the Cross and other areas of Sydney. Perce bought his first racehorse, Sugarfoot, in 1961. He had tremendous luck. His jockeys wore a black jacket with an orange Maltese cross, orange armbands and a black cap. He became a compulsive gambler and didn't slow down even after his first heart attack in 1962, aged only 52. The doctor warned him not to bet in large sums, but of course he ignored this. And his cult Eskimo Prince won the 1964 Golden Slipper. Perce, dubbed the Prince, won £33,000 and scattered banknotes to the crowd. Possibly the first Aussie to make it rain, literally. Of course, Perce didn't always win, but his other ventures kept him afloat. Perce had many winning horses and enjoyed the high life, introducing his sons into the business, one son giving him a little more grief than the other. But Perce couldn't complain. A young newsboy now made the news. He was of medium height and by the 60s had greying hair, but always looked presentable in expensive suits and shoes. He was such a celebrity now at the races by the early 1970s that he was followed around at the track, with many copying his bets. He loved the track and his horses so much that he erected a statue of his jockey at his Coogee Bay home in the garden. In 1962, he was interviewed on television about his tips for the Melbourne Cup. He predicted all 3 place getters correctly. But some say he wasn't as lucky as it seemed, that he paid lottery winners the value of the lottery ticket so as that he could launder dirty money. In the end, he only received a $50,000 fine for income undervaluing from 1955 to 1963, which he paid. He opened up the Bridge Club at Double Bay in 1974, where it turned over $2 million a week. Then he moved it to Bondi Junction at the Telford Towers 2 years later. Perce had so much luck now as a punter and gambling man, even winning the Sydney Opera House lottery in 1975, a prize of $200,000. And Beryl was interviewed saying that they were just so lucky. But were they? Or was he just laundering money? Could he have been the luckiest man in Australia? Well, most likely one of them. He decided to retire, enjoying his family and daily swims at Clovelly Beach, enjoying boxing matches and betting on them, as well as rugby league. Still a mate to many, including Chow Hayes, but sadly for Perce, the Prince, he died in 1977 of coronary heart disease at St Vincent's Hospital. Many notable people and celebrities were at his funeral. He was very well liked and adored, not just by friends, family and celebrities, but the press loved him too, which is interesting for a key figure in organised crime. Perce proving that money isn't all that evil. It brought he and his people much joy. I couldn't find him associated with one murder. Of course, there were murders around, but he himself was not a murderer. Not only was he the prince of organised crime, but he was a good bad guy. It showed as he was particularly close to the people at the top, like Robert Askin, the corrupt premier. Perce had a great life. It was a little confusing in the last couple of years, being fined for tax evasion, as well as his son's wife being murdered. And we'll get onto that in the next episode, when we take a look at Bruce, his son, and a little bit of Clive as well. But the mystery surrounding the death of Bruce's wife, and the controversy over why it took so long to put the men behind bars. Stay tuned. And if you like this episode, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you're aware when we're putting up another figure of organised crime, another criminal, cutthroat or convict.